As AUD has been improved, new categories of rules have been added, but don't overlook some useful but seldom used rules. In this short video, I'll present some ideas and uses for the feature identifier rules. To start, what is the feature identifier? In my sketch, you can see an overhead line between two poles and an underground line from a transformer to a handhole with a junction. When I select the underground conductor, you can see in Quick Info 3 bits of information about the conductor: the feature class, the model name, and the FID, which is the internal feature identifier. These 3 fields combine to form the default feature identifier. This information appears not only in Quick Info, but on the Validation Results tab, the Analysis tab, and in the Feature column on the Material tab. Now let's look at the feature identifier rules. In the US Imperial template, you won't find any feature identifier rules defined. And that's why, no matter what you draw, you see the default feature identifier. Now let's define a feature identifier rule for conductors. I'll click on Create Rule. The first thing to note is that you're prompted for a string expression and you're not prompted for a rule. That's because feature identifier rules are basically string equations to come up with a text string. There's no step-by-step logic here. First, let's just demo the rule in action. I'll enter a literal text string for my rule, test. I'll save this and select my conductor. Note that now all I see is the word test as the identifier. Not very useful, but at least you can see the rule in action. For my first real rule, I'm going to address a really common issue. Many utilities refer to their overhead lines different from their underground lines. For example, they refer to their overhead lines as conductors, but their underground lines as cables. So I'm going to create my own rule to handle this. Watch carefully. I'll select my earlier test string, and this time I'll look in the General Functions section. I'll choose Conditional Text. Here's the rule. Okay, I want to say that if the conductor is a cable, then use the label cable. It so happens that I remember there is a subrule that is already there called isCable. So instead of creating my own if statement here, I'll look in subrules and choose the isCable rule. I'll drop down to the string expression associated with isTrue. I'll click on it and type cable. Now I'll click on the string expression associated with otherwise, and here I'll click and type conductor. I'm a big proponent of testing as you go, so let's test this rule so far. Click on OK and select the conductor. Note it now says cable, but nothing else. We'll get to that. And now I'll click on the overhead line and see that it says conductor. Great, so far so good. Back in the rule editor, let's finish up this simple rule. I'll click on the Add Text field to the right, and from the Conductor Attributes section, I'll choose the model name. And also, from the Conductor Attributes, I'll choose the FID. This basically puts the remaining default values back in place. Now, what are these funny squares that automatically appear? These are default spaces. Usually these are handy, as I don't have to think about adding spaces. But be aware of these, because sometimes you don't want a space, and AUD's already inserted it, and you'll have to remove it. Let's click on OK, and now look at our overhead and underground cables. The underground line is now a cable, and the overhead line is a conductor. But wait, there's so much more we can do with this feature identifier rule. Here's a more advanced function you might consider. First, I'm going to select my transformer, and I'm going to set the name number field to T1234. And I'll select my handhold with junction and set the name number field for the junction to J5678. Remember, the name number field is the generic field in AUD that's commonly used for identifying components. What's nice about this field is that every feature class has it, so you can rely on it being available. And in the next couple of minutes, you'll see why it's better to use this field for identifying components instead of creating your own custom fields. Now let's define a couple new expression rules. Under text expressions for conductors, I'll add a new subrule. I'll name this rule ID start because it's going to evaluate the identifier of the device at the start of the conductor. Now this next thing might not be obvious, but I'm going to choose an aggregate rule. Aggregate rules are commonly used in cases where you can't be sure there's only one object. While most conductors only connect to one device, they could theoretically be connected to more than one, and we have to take that possibility, however slim, into account. I'm going to choose the first function. Basically, I'm not going to worry about what to do if there's more than one connection. Whatever the first thing it's connected to, that's good enough for me. So I want the first of values from what? There are numerous choices, but in this case, I want the first thing connected at the start point of the conductor. Next question, what kind of thing am I looking for? Well, it's going to be in the electric section, but it might be a transformer or a junction or a capacitor or yipes. It could be pretty much any electrical device. Fortunately, the rules engine can handle this. I can choose electric point, which is any electric point device. Now for the expression. What attribute do I want from that electric point device? Well, you might guess I'm going to choose name number. And that's why I always advocate using name number for storing your identifiers instead of custom fields. Unless your custom field is named the same in all cases, it won't work in a case like this. Okay, that's it. There's my expression rule. I'll click on accept so the rule is kept, and then quickly create a second rule to create an equivalent function for the ID at the end point. Once this is done, I'll click on accept to keep this one as well. Now it's time to go back to my feature identifier rule. I'll replace model name with my new subrule ID start. I'll enter a dash and a greater than symbol to create an arrow. I'll add the ID end subrule and then put model name and FID back in. While I'm at it, I'll do a little cleanup, like putting an open parentheses in front of the model name and a closed parentheses after the FID. Finally, let's test it. And there you go, a much more useful feature identifier. There's so much more you can do with these feature identifiers. Here's a quick list of some ideas. You could, for example, add a single character status value so you don't have to select the object to know its status. You could have some kind of flag that lets you know if one or both ends aren't connected. And a common thing, especially when you're using IDs like this, is to have some kind of what happens if the ID is missing warning ID, so that you can look at your feature info and know immediately if a device's ID hasn't been filled out properly.